Yeah, I'm resuming the meeting at 7 PM. We have 5 topics regarding planning, and Dave Kretz is going to lead us through them.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Our first order of business is Special Exception 2021-05. It's submitted by Justine McFarland. The request is for approval of a special exception to construct and operate a nursery in accord with Section 8-3.7 of the Middlesex County zoning ordinance. The property for which a special exception is being requested is Zone Village Community and is situated at 168 Warner Road, Urbana, Virginia, 23175. It's further identified as tax map parcel 18152, and it's in the Jamaica district. Just a narrative of all the statistics for the site. It's a 5-acre site. Future land use listed as mixed use. This is the location of the project. You can see it's located near the intersection of Warner Road and Route 17. The parcel sitting in the triangle would be something that everybody would know would be Churchview Septic. And this is the current zoning. You can see it's Zone Village Community with some general business and mostly LDR scattered about, some light industrial up to the northwest. And this is a future land use map, which pretty much correlates with the current zoning. These are a few pictures of the site. You can see it's currently used for agricultural purposes. And the applicants actually, I think, live in that home. And that would be looking back towards the intersection. This is just a basic site plan they've submitted. It shows how where the use will be located. So again, we're looking for an approval for a special exception to operate a nursery in VC. VC requires a special exception use for a nursery. Should be noted that in a nursery, greenhouses, as soon as they get this, if so approved, greenhouses would be considered accessory and could be approved by the planning department. All these, I'm going to run through these quickly. The criteria is met through these. All these were in your board packet. If somebody has questions, they can stop me. But staff felt that these were compliant with these requirements. Just going to go through them quickly. There's the definition of a nursery. It's basically a facility where plants are grown for sale, transplanting, experimentation. Staff feels that this use is well suited for the area proposed. Conversion of the current use to a nursery would transition the property to a commercial use while still maintaining the rural character of the area. This is consistent with the intent of the zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan. Based on this analysis above, this special exception request is in substantial conformance with the requirements of Section 8-4 and Section 20-5B of the county zoning ordinance. With that, staff recommends approval of special exception 2021-05. And at that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to the chair to open up public hearing. I believe the applicants are here tonight to speak on their behalf, too.
Thank you. Would the applicants like to address the board?
May I take my mask off so you can, thank you. I just want to say thank you guys for being here and reviewing this, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the farm or the future plans of the farm. But I mostly just wanted to say hi, because I'm relatively new to the county.
Well, welcome to the county.
Thank you.
Does anyone have questions? The only question that occurred to me is I've seen no longer in use greenhouses that are made of plastic covering, and they become unsightly as they become torn. And so I guess my only thought in
Sure.
looking this over was to make sure that that doesn't happen, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I would be using those tunnels almost year-round, and it's 5-year plastic. And so it's imperative to me, if I want my plants to go correctly, that I replace the plastic before it starts to look like that, because it's going to block sunlight getting through. So I would not let that happen.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm just curious, what crops are you raising? What are you selling? Is it
Cut flowers.
cut flowers and retail, local, wholesale?
Mostly wholesale through Richmond. I run a collective with 9 different farms, but I do retail here, and I have a CSA program.
And have you made Middlesex home? I'm just curious, is this one of many farms, or is this where you're?
This is it for us, yeah.
And what drew you to Middlesex, if I may ask?
We wanted farmland, and you guys have a lot of it.
And now you do too.
Now I do too.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you. There are no other questions? Sorry?
You need to open the public hearing.
Oh, thank you. For those in the audience, I still have my training wheels on, so I'm getting some help. Would anybody in the audience like to address this topic? So do I open the public input? Does anybody have anything they'd like to say? No? I'll close the public input. And now I open to the board.
Okay, all right. Mr. Chair, I
Thank
would
you,
like to say
Mr.
I'm very familiar with that, with the area, because I'm born and raised in that area. I'm welcoming them to the area, and I think it's an excellent location for something like this in Middlesex County. And if no one has anything else, I'd like to make a motion that we have special exception 2021-5 for the nursery.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jesse, second by Mr. Harris. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Williams?
Aye.
Mr. Jesse?
Aye.
And Mr. Kimbrough?
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This is our second action item tonight. It's Ordinance Amendment 2021-03, initiated by Paul and Tracy Seitz. The request is for the purpose of amending Article 8, Section 8-3, Village Community of the Middlesex County zoning ordinance to add boat, RV, and camper storage yards as a special exception use, and add boat, RV, and camper storage yards to the Article 22 definitions. I want to make a note, due to a clerical error, application was previously advertised as Ordinance Amendment 2021 for the Planning Commission meeting on January 13th. Of course, the request is identical. There's no changes in that. And Ms. Lewis says this is acceptable correction. So legally, we're okay. The proposed amended zoning ordinance amendment would add boat, RV, camper storage yards as a special exception use in VC. It would be listed as 8-3.31. Boat, RV, and camper storage yards are not currently defined or permitted in the zoning ordinance. We would consider any boat storage of that nature to be accessory and waterfront commercial associated with marinas. So we're used to seeing this in certain districts. The applicant is requesting the text amendment in association with a special exception request to establish a boat, RV, and camper storage yard on tax parcel 40-249A, which is submitted along with this application. The ordinance committee met to establish the parameters and conditions that would be placed on this. Consensus among the committee members and staff was that the use should have adequate screening to obscure the use from street and adjoining property owner view, and that it should be listed within the special exception uses. Requiring special exception approval would allow the Planning Commission Board of Supervisors some latitude with respect to location appropriateness of the site. Also, part of the discussion was to establish greater setbacks, similar to solar facilities, to allow more desirable uses to be located along the corridors. That discussion didn't gather as much steam as it did, and the additional setbacks are being proposed to allow ample area basically to install vegetation, not to create a different corridor district. The draft ordinance language included below does not have setbacks included that would, the draft ordinance language included below does not have the setbacks included that would allow a separate development corridor, just as it. So the special exception use 8-3.23, leasing of portable storage units, which is a similar use, does not currently have any additional setback or yard requirements. I'm just going to go through this quickly. This is how it would appear in the ordinance. These are the conditions that we would place on it. The use, along with any associated security fencing, shall maintain a minimum 50-foot setback from any public right-of-way or a minimum of 20 foot from any rear or side yard property line. The standard for that district would be 30 from the front and 10 from the side. Excuse me. Opaque screening shall be installed directly adjacent to the use between the facility and the adjoining property line. The screening may be existing vegetation if adequate. If adequate natural screening is not present or insufficient, vegetation shall be planted to achieve the purpose listed above. Privacy fencing may be utilized in lieu of vegetation. Item C, in order to verify compliance with the special exception approval, the owner operator shall supply the Department of Planning with a January 1 inventory of all vehicles and vessels stored on site. That includes the type of vehicle or vessel, along with a vehicle identification or hull number. This inventory shall be supplied prior to or on March 1 after the inventory date. I added this in, the below was taken from, there's been some conversation about screening. Put this in here, I just dropped it in, it's not in your board packet. But this came from our, the part at the bottom of this screen, and the next screen came from our solar ordinance, if we need to use that for reference going forward in discussion. The definitions, this is how the definition would look in the ordinance. Based on Planning Commission and staff and the Ordinance Committee, staff recommends approval of Ordinance Amendment 2020-103, and the Planning Commission voted 8-0 with 1 absent and 2 abstentions to recommend approval of Ordinance Amendment 2020-103 as well. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to you, and you can, I believe the applicants are here to represent their application. Although, keep in mind, this is just the ordinance amendment. This isn't the request for the special exception. So,
Thank you. Would the applicant like to address the board?
My name is Mike Jackson. Y'all excuse my voice. I'm having a problem with it being out in this weather. I'm Mike Jackson. I'm a real estate broker. My office is here in Saluda, and I'm representing Paul and Tracy as well as the potential buyer. The main point that I just wanted to bring to the board is I personally live in a subdivision, large subdivision, that does not allow you to have your boat or your camper or your RV. In looking around the county, there are several subdivisions that do not allow you to park it on your property. Now, in Mariners Woods, where I live, if you can park it out of sight of the road, that's fine, but that's hard to do in a larger subdivision. So I just wanted to bring that point to the board. I I get a lot of requests from people moving into Middlesex. Where can I keep my 40-foot RV, or where can I keep my camper, or where can I keep my boat? And really, it's tough, unless you just want to take it. I mean, there are a couple marinas large enough with fields, but I mean, they want something with some protection, and this would be a keyless entry, gated. Talked to Dave considerably about the 50-foot setback. We think that's great, because actually, you need that 50-foot so you're not hindering traffic just pulling in there. So you get before you enter the gate itself. So that's what my client so desires to do, and more than willing to work with this board and with Dave. And we're all about the screening. A really nice job has been done straight across the street from Mr. Ayersman, who owns the boat repair and outboard motor sales and repair. It's directly across the street, and he has done an excellent job of screening. He planted up, and I use him personally. And I will be talking to him to find out exactly what he planted, because it grew quick. It was like 4 or 5 feet a year. And he's basically covered, the area. That's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Jackson?
Hey, I got a couple questions. I appreciate the idea of what you were saying. Somebody need, a place for the RVs, campers, and all this kind of stuff, knowing that they don't allow it in basically cul-de-sac setting. They got their own ground rules. At the same time, the part I'm most interested about is you screaming, you buffering, or whatever, because I know we got a letter from, I guess, the lady you talked to last week, or the last time we were here, and that's the only concern I got. And the business across the road, they have this real landscape. You really can't see it no more than the entrance. They've done a wonderful job. And that would apply to everything she wrote in the letter if you had something like that. So if you do the proper buffering and fencing or whatever it is, with the proper distance off a line, and I look at that area every day because I pass a bus there.
Right.
And I think the last meeting I was telling you, I got to find out exactly where it was. And I believe they be sure to take care of our owners that's next to us. And with that buffering, like you were saying it should be, and evidently it's in writing like Dave had put in, it seems to be a good project that y'all taking on. Thank you.
At this point, we're just considering whether we create a special exception for this use. And then we would actually address your particular request to use that special exception if we approve the special exception.
See, the only thing I'm saying, I think something Wayne said, do you put the cart before your horse? We get special exception and we don't pass your buffering, you still can't do that. So I'm looking at the whole picture of the whole thing. That's the only difference I'm looking at. Look, I understand the procedures and stuff like that to go by, but I like to see the whole thing. I mean, we can't keep putting the cart before the horse, because to get there and we pass it, then go on your buffering and stuff, we decide, hey, this not enough, you got to do a whole lot more. And anyway, that's where I'm at on it, but I do understand what you're saying.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
One thing, Mr. Williams, I did speak with the lady that was at the zoning meeting, and I told her, I understood where she was coming from, because she owns the property next door. And I told her, if this project is approved, we will actually get her input on that screening, not only fencing, but the type of bushes or plants that we're gonna plant. And, we're gonna try to work with the neighbors.
That in writing, there's not much to be said there.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I'll open the public comment on this. Anybody wish to speak? I'll close the public comment and open the floor for comments from the board. Any comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I guess one thing, I apologize, I read over the packet, but I want to make sure I understand what Mr. Kretz is saying, is that the buffering that you're wanting, is correct, is not in the draft?
There is buffering requirement in the draft ordinance.
You put, so that's what I was, because you said in one slide that it did not, and then below you said,
Just let me-
yeah. I just want to
Yeah.
make sure, because that seems to be a concern, so.
So if we look at C. No,
Is that
I'm sorry.
added now
Back
in-
up.
Yeah.
I apologize. B,
B. Okay, so that's, but you were saying there was additional language if the board wanted.
what I did is, when you get past, C is what has been proposed. And just as a courtesy or as an enhancement, I copied and pasted, see where it says, "The landscaping plan shall include a mix of vegetation." That is taken from our solar ordinance. And I did that in case we want to refer to that, because that's been established as well. This, if you go back up to, it's saying, B is saying it has to be opaque screening. And it's saying it can be vegetation or a fence. So in the end, where it's not specific is whenever you have natural or vegetated screening, you're going to have that transition period where you go from to being able to see it to where it becomes full, just like Mr. Arizman's business, when he planted it, now it's so full you can't see in it. It looks, you can't see through the screening. So the natural screening probably looks better than a fence, but it takes a little bit longer to establish itself and get going. So I want to remind the board that in a special exception process, there's a caveat at the end that the board can add in any other conditions they so choose. So if they don't feel the ordinance carries it, the board has a little latitude with a special exception approval to add something or to require, they have a few more tools in their toolbox when you get to reviewing a special exception itself. So this, the ordinance is set up as kind of a minimum to, it's what staff and the planning commission and what, in most cases, this will be adequate. But the board is going to have that discretion at times when, owners, adjoining property owners could be affected in some negative way where they could exercise the ability to require something else. So, the question comes up, do you want to, we try to keep our ordinances as simple as possible going forward without muddling them up with too much language, when the board still has that ability to kind of capture some things at the special exception phase, which would come up after this. So that would be that's what I'm trying to convey to the board right now, I guess.
So,
Does
thank you.
it-
So essentially, as drafted, the specification is opaque screening.
Yes, that's what the requirement is, opaque screening. And it's their option to use what they prefer. I think you had an email that preferred the fencing in fear that the vegetated screening would be 1 or 2 foot plants that take 20 years to grow, and that's a valid concern. It really is. So the board there again, you have tools in your toolbox that could specify height or, if you have a concern with a adjoining owner, so. But does the board have any questions about that? Maybe I'll expand on. Okay.
No questions?
Okay,
Thank you, Dave.
thank you.
Comments? Mr.
No,
Chris?
Well, like I said, I don't have any comments at this time. I would like to make a motion if nobody else have any more comments. If not, I'd like to make a motion to approve Amendment 2021-03 for the change in the village community for be able to put a RV and also a boat storage. Ordinance, change in
Thank
the
you.
ordinance for that in village community.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Jesse, second by Mr. Williams. Any further discussion? A roll call.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Jesse,
Yes.
Mr. Coons,
Yes.
Mr. Kimbrough.
Yes. All right. Next on the agenda is a particular submission.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This is Special Exception 2021-06 submitted by Paul and Tracy Seitz. This request is for approval of a special exception to allow what the board just passed as far as the ordinance amendment goes. The property for which a special exception is being requested is zoned Village Community and is situated along Fishing Bay Road. Does not have address to date. It's in Deltaville, and it's further identified as tax map parcel 40-249A, and it's in the Pine Top District. Just the site statistics, you can see the parcel is about 3.27 acres. It's currently vacant. I believe it's all open. I think it's a grass field. And you have various uses surrounding it, some residential, village community. Across the street is village community, and that's mostly commercial uses directly across the street. This is the parcel. It's outlined in blue. It's maybe a little hard to see. Like Mr. Jackson just said a moment ago, that directly across the street is Randy Ayresman's boat repair. Randy Randolph has I believe it may be just to the southeast. He has a contractor's yard. So there are several commercial uses adjacent to it. And down at the bottom of the page was, I believe, Lighthouse Marine. It was at the intersection of Moores Creek Road. So this is the current zoning. You can see residential kind of sits to the southwest. Village community pretty much to the northeast. Future land use map pretty much correlates with the existing zoning. And this is a picture that's kind of an aerial view, kind of gives you a view. You can see that it's all field and open. And this is a picture that this property was subdivided about a year or so ago. I just, at this time, we don't have a schematic or a concept plan. So I just basically took the subdivision map and showed the offsets on it or setbacks, and just to give give a little bit of perspective as how it would work. And that's just the subdivision plat. It's clean with nothing on it. The request is for approval of a special exception to allow a boat, RV, and camper storage yard in accord with proposed Section 8-331 of the Middlesex County zoning ordinances. Currently, boat, RV, and camper storage yards are not defined or permitted. That's that the board just took action on that, so that's taken care of. If Ordinance Amendment 2021-01 is approved, which it was, this use would be allowed with approval of special exception. I'm just going to go, this is all in your board packet. The basic criteria for VC, it complies. It's plenty of frontage and lot area. These are all somewhat subjective. I mean, these are all conditions. It's like an agreement. They have to comply with this in order to get final approval. There again, we know the opaque screening and this inventory. All they have to, this has to be agreed upon. It's understood. So and this is from Section 20-5-B. Again, I'm not going to labor on this. I'm going to go through it quickly. That's the definition of the boat and storage yard. Staff, the Planning Commission, and the Board of Supervisors have had discussions regarding location of uses that focus on storage only. Storage uses may include currently permitted self-storage buildings and special exception uses such as the leasing of storage units. Through the special exception process, the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors have some latitude with respect to location. The location being proposed will have public water available in the coming months, with possible sewer in the near future. These amenities will make the site more conducive to a more desirable use going forward. However, the project site is not located on a major travel corridor, which may cause some delay for the desired development. Because the overall development costs are relatively low, the proposed use may serve well as an interim use until such time that the area becomes more attractive to more desirable types of development. Current adjoining uses include a boat repair facility and a contractor's yard. Both uses have similar appearance to that which is being proposed. With that, staff recommends approval of Special Exception 2021-06. Of course, it's contingent on the ordinance amendment that was just adopted, and it's subject to the special exception criteria in 8-4. And I'm going to leave this with this is the opportunity for the board to assess the appropriateness of the setbacks and the screening. And like I said, the board does have that tool in their toolbox to work with the applicant on that. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, and open up the public hearing.
Thank you.
Applicant.
Would you like to speak any further to the board about this?
Unless you have any questions.
Okay, I'll open this for public comment. Any public comment? I'll close the public comment period. I'm getting very good at this.
I have a cricket's ringback tone I can play.
Discussion among the board members. Any comments from others? I got a couple comments. I'm very familiar with this location. This is a major access for people who are going to Fishing Bay Yacht Club, which brings a lot of people from out of town. So it's a corridor that we like to look good. Mr. Randolph's construction has done a fabulous job. His construction home looks first class. It's beautiful. Randy Ayersman's done a great job with his screening. Like you said, you can't even see past the shrubs. And it didn't take long. It took maybe 5 or 6 years. I used to live down that road, and I am very familiar with the Ayersmans. So I think that they've done a good job. So I guess the first question is, we don't have yet, as Dave said, a schematic or a concept plan. So I can't visualize yet exactly what you would like to do and what it would look like from the road. We don't have any proposal for lighting. Is there going to be lighting? And if so, what its plans would be. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, Dave. Maybe this is the major site plan. Another question that I have is fire department access. If a boat in that storage facility was to catch fire and threatens to spread, will the fire department have access? So these are all things that I would like to see. I think that this could be made as beautiful as the other facilities that are on that road, but I feel like right now it's a little bit too much for my imagination as to what it's going to look like. That's just my thoughts on there. Any other?
I'd just be curious, Dave's response to that, is it appropriate for us to have more information at this stage, or are we getting ahead of ourselves with that commentary?
Good question.
It is usually, and a lot of times, the board may have some type of, the developer may have put something together to give you maybe not a final site plan. And lighting would be, I guess the question could be asked tonight, are you going to light it or not? If you're going to light it, then the lighting would have to meet the site plan requirements, a 1/2 foot candle at the property line. In this case, they may even want more, less lighting at the board. So a lot of those details aren't spelled out. So I can understand the board's confusion a little bit at this point. So it wouldn't be out of line for the board to ask for a little bit more information. Maybe they can provide that tonight, or maybe they have to come back and discuss it and come back with a different plan. So it's quite appropriate if you don't feel comfortable with a decision to table it and ask the.
But Dave, aren't those items covered in the site plan process?
A lot of the lighting is. It seems like the board's a little uncomfortable with the screening. That could be somewhat subjective at this point. Usually there's a little bit more information submitted with a special exception. So it's completely up to the board what their comfort level is going forward. I think with the site plan, I think the site plan will go to the planning commission. And if they, the board could specify a certain height tonight that they want if they want to go vegetative screening, that, it'd be, have to be 4 to 6 feet at planning time. So the board could certainly exercise some of their, their tools in their toolbox to try to get a little bit better feel what you have going forward. Also, I want to make one other comment too. When it goes through site plan, we'll look at adjoining uses too, because there's some little catches in the zoning ordinance that require a little more separation and screening requirements through the site plan process with respect to adjoining residential properties as well. So they're kind of buried in Article 15, and they're not really, it's kind of an unusual situation, but there's other tools within the ordinance to actually require screening and that type of thing, so.
I'm a terrible landscape developer. You've been to my house. I would myself feel more comfortable if maybe you could come back at our next meeting and have visual plan that showed the detail of the screening that you would propose initially if it's going to be vegetative, and having discussed that with your adjacent property owner who voiced concerns about the opacity of the screening, because the ordinance says it needs to be opaque. I would just feel better if there was more fully baked visualization that I could look at. I could tell you that it needs to be 4 to 6 feet, but I'm not sure what that means or how dense it is, and how do you need to space the trees apart because the branches are going to reach out like Randy's did. That would be my request.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'll let-
Yeah,
Dave, I got a question for you before you run off. Maybe I misheard you, but did you not say that once, if it's approved, there are some stipulations of, and I thought height was in one of them, I can't put my hands on it, of what the screening would be?
The height would be associated with eventually you want whatever is growing to obscure
Yes?
all the fencing. Now, in the real world, there may be some boat tower that sticks out over top of the screen. I don't know that you can capture every tuna tower and every, an RV that's there. You may
Right.
see the top of it. We live in a real world of, nothing's perfect. But, if they're planted, one of the property owner's concerns were what if these were 1.5 feet tall? You know, we might not in our lifetime see them come to fruition. You could place a stipulation that it has to be a certain height at planting. You know, a lot of times that's 4 to 6 feet. Or they could also use privacy fencing over on that side too. So they've indicated that they want to use, I believe, vegetative screening. So, but if the board's not comfortable with it, I mean, you're trying to appease a joint property owner. We could table it and bring it back for next month, give them an opportunity to get a sketch done up. They could consult a landscape person, you know, their choice, and just do a sketch and bring it back.
That's certainly
Or,
what I would prefer to do, so we can really have a better idea of, I mean, the opacity requirement is one that you have to meet, and in order to satisfy your neighbor as well as the ordinance requirement, right?
right. It says it has to be opaque,
We just
so
need
you
to
can't see
understand
through it.
how that will happen.
Yeah. Get an estimated time. We all know that even with the solar facilities, there's a transition period that, you know, we're not requiring them to plant specimen trees that are 30 foot tall. I mean, they're younger trees, and it's going to take a few years for them to fill in, so.
Has there been any concern voiced to the planning commission based on what the adjacent landowner has said or not said, or agreed or not agreed?
The adjoining landowner sent me a separate email from what you were sent, so I'm not sure what y'all received. She sent the board members and didn't copy me on it. So I'm not sure what was in yours, but her concern was that these plants would be small plants. And it would be better if she were here tonight. Some of this could be resolved. It's kind of unfortunate that she couldn't be here, because I'm not sure where she would be comfortable, somewhere between something that's 2 feet tall or 30 foot tall. So I can't speak totally for her.
I mean, it seems to me she says she'd request that you please consider requiring a privacy fence on the sides and rear of a boat and RV storage facility and not having it as an option. You said you hadn't seen this, so
Yeah.
this is the meat of it. If you won't consider making a privacy fence a standard requirement, then please consider a minimum 5 to 6 foot evergreen requirement, staggered to allow growth between the chain link fence and property lines to truly obscure the facility. To me, I don't really want to delay things, and I don't really want somebody to spend the expense to come up with a fancy landscaping package. We just need assurance that it's going to be 5 to 6 feet, it's going to be opaque, and if that means saying it's this kind of Leland cypress, or I don't know, but something that can actually be backed with the notion that this does fill out in 1 year to 2 years, it will be 5 to 6 feet. If we're hearing from the people that want to build this, that they're intending to put a fence, that may solve 50% of this. I just think if we could, rather than be the conduit between the neighbors, just have something that suggests that it's going to meet the opacity intent and give us a sense that we can rubber stamp it. I don't think any of us want to hold this up. I don't think any of us want to piss off the neighbor. We just need the neighbors to be communicating that, you know, that particular neighbor in this instance wants to make sure it's at least 5 to 6 feet, and ideally with a fence is how I read that. So I think to Lud's point, if we could just get nothing fancy, but just something that tells us that it's going to be 5 to 6 feet in a reasonable amount of time, it's going to be opaque, and whatever else they're already thinking, if they're already thinking fence, this may be closer to resolved and doesn't really need to get to this place than we think.
It sounds to me as if you have a specification to go on that would make that adjoining property happy, more so than I received, so that's.
Yeah, right.
So you may be able to go on that, there's your spec right there. So
Yeah, well, and I think, to me, it doesn't mean we want somebody to go back and get special engineering, just assure us that it's going to be 5 to 6 feet and that it's going to be opaque, and I think that probably satisfies everybody, and everybody moves on, and we're there.
Well, your applicants here, they can that can be discussed with the applicants, so.
Dave, can't the board make that a condition of the special exception approval?
Absolutely.
Okay. I just want to
Absolutely.
make sure you advise them of that,
Yes.
because it sounds like they've got the condition, and it could be added to the approval,
That's-
if they wanted to approve it and make it conditioned
Yeah,
upon that.
as I noted earlier, the board has the ability to add, the ordinance specifies that any other conditions that the board sees fit for the special exception requirement application. So you have that ability to put special conditions on a special exception. That's in your toolbox.
So, follow-up question to the applicants. Are y'all in agreement with what was just said?
We don't have to be. No, really, that's fine. I don't see a problem with that. But one thing I want to bring up to the board is, unlike Randy Arisman's, straight across the street, he did his plannings, and he did a row of them, and they're wonderful. But we have a 50-foot setback. My suggestion is to Dave and to the board, we got 50 feet, basically. We can put several rows from the highway on that entrance. Unlike, even though what Randy Arisman did worked, but, I mean, we can fill that thing up if we have to. Or plan them so that you've got them staggered, but not just a single row. So if one dies out or two dies out, then you got a backup, more or less. The other thing is, on the side that the lady in question that was at the zoning meeting, that property that Paul and Tracy own is already 40-foot trees on that whole sideline for a small depth. So you already got a buffer somewhat to start with. So then we'd come back and we'd put the fencing up and then add more plantings, kind of like what Randy did next door. Put your row up. But with the vegetation already there, I mean, that's a help in protecting her. I'm not sure if she's looked at the property line or not. She'll see that when she does. Just a point I wanted to bring up.
Thank you.
Then we got 50 foot.
Yeah, with 50 feet, you can easily make that opaque by staggered plantings, for sure,
Sure.
as long as they're tall enough. So, John, would you like to articulate what it is you said so well before?
I'm being trained not to talk so much. I think my motion, I move that we ask the applicant to, and Heather, you may have to jump in here, but that we ask the applicant to add to their application a drawing that shows the height of their barrier, their visual barrier, and that speaks to the opacity of it and where it is on the property.
So you don't necessarily, you can just ask that? I apologize, I guess I'm,
Just make it a condition.
you could make it a condition, you can ask them that directly, Neil. I guess I'm not 100% understanding the intent.
Let me try again. I
Okay,
mean,
sorry.
can we just ask them if
Yeah.
they're going to make it 5 to 6 feet tall and opaque?
I mean, that can be a condition, you can ask, yes, and if they, depending on their answer, you can address it, or you, as Mr. Walker was saying, you can simply make it a condition of your approval that,
And that's just for this property, not like a whole new
Right.
zoning?
It's a
Special
special
exception.
exception.
So it's-
It takes into consideration the unique characteristics of this property with special conditions put on it by the board and/or planning commission.
Well, before I make that motion, I'd like to ask the applicant,
absolutely, so you
just
yeah.
point blank, do you intend to make it 5 to 6 feet tall and opaque?
You mean?
The visual barrier.
The initial plan is 5 or 6 foot? Is that what you're asking?
It appears they're asking what, I'm sorry, sir, what's the plan for buffering? Can you tell us what you
Yeah.
guys
The
plan
plan
to?
for buffers, not, This is very similar to a Leland cypress, but we all know
Okay.
Leland cypress is beautiful, but after about
They
5
die.
years, they start to die. They
Yes,
get a
they do.
disease. There is another plant, it's called a green giant, and it is from the oak family, and it is extremely hardy. And if you stand back 20 feet, I bet you can't tell the difference in if one is a green giant or Leland cypress. They have the same type of,
How tall are you gonna have when planting?
you'll get 30 feet. But they'll grow 4 foot a year.
Plant,
Oh, I think most of them, you buy will be about like this, but they'll grow 4 feet a year.
I think what they're asking is that they be 5 to 6 feet at the time of planting.
That gets expensive.
Yeah, and I don't know that I'm necessarily asking for that. I want to know that if it's planted at 2 feet next month, within a year or two, it's going to be 5 to 6 feet. I think that's all that, me personally, that's all I would be asking. It gets really expensive to start planting 6 and 8 foot tall. We see this in the solar industry all the time, and then drive by the coal plants and they have nothing in front of them, but that's a whole nother thing. To me, I'm ready to approve this based on the fact that they're saying they're going to plant 3 foot tall, what was the name? Monster, what is it?
Green giant.
Green
is what they
giant,
call it.
and a fence.
But I will get, I'll ask, I prefer me not to answer how they're gonna grow, but I would like to bring a letter from Brian Major.
I mean, if
And he can tell us.
if delaying it a month to bring that with the application doesn't hurt you terribly, I think that would make it easier for everyone to just sort of be able to see from your expert planter, we're going to be planting 17 2-footers over here and 37 over here. They're expected to grow 2 foot a year, whatever it is. And to have that from your horticulture expert, that to me gives us an easy rubber stamp in the sense that's going to be opaque within a year, unless somebody feels that it should be opaque immediately. I don't think that's the intent of the Planning Commission's recommendation. I think what they want to know is that there's a legitimate attempt made to achieve opacity in a reasonable amount of time, and I think that's the intent. But if we had from your garden expert, here's the plant, here's how many, here's the spacing, it goes along with this fence, I think that makes it easy for us to just all say that meets the intent. And if it takes you a month to get that and come back in a month, and that's not too much to ask, I think that solves it.
I can have it in a week.
But we would have to see this again in a month. It would be essentially tabled until that
Understand.
information was, that's how I would solve it.
Can we make the motion contingent on that material being supplied to the Planning Commission?
I heard a motion.
Are you sending this matter back to the Planning Commission for review?
No, what I was saying, is it appropriate for us to make a motion to approve the special exemption request with the exception of they follow through with what John had just asked on height and growth times and et cetera, et cetera? Can I make a motion like that?
You can, but I'm not sure procedurally that it would be effective. So if I may, and maybe between Mr. Walker and Mr. Kretz, he can help me better clarify. By doing that, you're at a little bit of a crossroads. Your options right now are to make a motion to table this matter to allow the applicant to provide the statements on the vegetation and the growth, as Mr. Coons was just saying. You can approve it as is, or you can approve it with stipulations. I'm making this up. We approve this so long as you plant purple trees with pink berries on them. I'm picking something outlandish because I don't want to give any implication of what they need to approve. The motion you're trying to make, Mr. Harris, I hear your intent, but I'm not sure that procedurally it would be not correct.
Well, and that's why I asked that question. Matter of fact, I'd like to put it to bed, too.
If I could chime in, the planning commission voted to approve it.
Yeah, you're right.
Right.
So it's the board that wants the additional assurances on landscaping. My recommendation, if asked for it, I would say put a condition of approval on it, that they plant a landscaping screening of a certain height, and if you want to give them leeway on what the horticulturist thinks is the right height, I mean, that's fine. the intent from the board is you want it screened from view from the adjoining property owner and from the road, and you make the approval contingent upon that. And they come back with a landscaping plan during the site plan process, and if it's not up to snuff, and remember, the board can pull site plans up to your level for review, you hold the site plan up, because your approval on the special exception is contingent upon that. So again, you can pull the site plan up to your level and review it too, along with the planning commission. I'm actually surprised the planning commission didn't beat the landscaping thing to death. Wayne, how many recommendations have we seen come up with landscaping all over? Was Maryland South out that day?
I think the basis, if I may.
That's what I was gonna say.
Is it on? So I think our baseline or our benchmark for this facility was the storage pod storage, which didn't have any screening to it. What had, in other words, the horse is already out of the barn, so to speak. So that's a special exception use, but it only had just what would be standard for any site plan, a deciduous tree and a couple shrubs. So we wanted to one-up that. We knew that, we looked back at that facility or that particular use, and we knew, well, we need to fix that a little bit. So thus they came up with the language that it needs to be opaque screening. So I think the question comes up is, we know there's going to be some time between, if they choose vegetation, there's going to be a lag time in there between the time it's totally screened and the time that, from the time they plant it. So the closer the thing is, the vegetation is to having a proper height, the sooner it'll get to achieve the goal of being opaque. So, maybe the board puts a minimum height on it of 4 feet, something, you pick a height and 4 feet and go with it and make it happen.
Is there any qualifications in the landscaping ordinance on height?
There may be on certain things, but it's,
Would it have to meet that at the site plan process?
yeah, but a lot of those are tagged to deciduous type trees and not necessarily, it's a little bit apples and oranges to a certain degree, so.
Mr. Chair, given the discussion, I'd like to make a motion that we approve special exception 2021-06.
And I second it.
Any more discussion?
I got a question. Are we saying we're going to accept this with the screening? That's why we passed it right now. I think the gentleman said that they was willing to put the fence up and the buffering. So if you put the fence up, a 6-foot fence up, then you got time for the, the buffer on the trees to grow. So according to the email that was sent by the landowner, that's basically what she's saying. For them to make sure they're gonna put the fence up, and I think that's what John's saying. Then you make sure you got the trees at least 4 feet by staggered, then that will give you, you see that word, so you can't see through it?
Yeah.
Opaque, so.
So John's proposal doesn't have any of that in it.
Yeah, so you'd have to amend your,
John's proposal
Matt, can you back up
doesn't
this?
have any conditions.
You'd have to
in it.
amend
It
your
does not
motion.
have any conditions. I'm just approving, my motion is to approve it as is, and it's because of number 2 on the slide right here. We have final approval, subject to the major site plan. So if they come back and they put up a molehill that's 1 inch tall, we can say that's not what we envisioned. So I think the process has an additional step for us if they come back with a final plan that has all this information in it, and it feels like it's not going to meet what all 5 of us believe is opacity. We have another bite at this apple, so I think we can let this roll and not hold anybody up, and it becomes on the onus of the applicant to demonstrate goodwill, good faith, and I think they're here saying they're willing to do that, and I take them at their word.
We just have to specify that the major site plan comes to us, because they don't.
you can
Without
make
that
that decision, I send out a letter, you can make that decision later. You could look at the site plan and look
Okay.
at, and,
All right.
you could,
Also, Mr. Chairman,
you
you
can-
can communicate with your planning commission your concerns and make sure that they address that at their level. Again, not singling any one planning commission member out. I'm a little shocked it didn't come up at the planning commission, because that's one of the things the
Yeah.
planning commission always looks for is the landscaping and the screening. I think the applicants have heard, the board wants it screened, right? Yep.
Okay. Then we have a motion by Mr. Kuntz. Second by Don.
Ready?
Ready.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Jesse?
Yes.
Mr. Coons?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Kimbrough?
Yes.
I'm just going to stay up here. So
Okay.
move this
All right.
along a little
Moving right
bit.
along, Dave.
Yeah,
Ordinance amendment.
All right, this is the fun one. This is non-conformities.
Thank you, gentlemen.
If we got wrapped around the axle before, we'll really get wrapped around the axle now. So I'll try to make this as quickly as possible. So anyway, this is Ordinance Amendment 2020-102, initiated by the Middlesex County Planning Commission. The request is for the purpose of amending Article 18, nonconformities, Section 18-5 and 18-6, and removing special exception requirements defined within the Middlesex County zoning ordinance. The purpose of the amendment is to revise the sections pursuant to state code. I'm just gonna jump out of here, and all this is gonna be paraphrased. So currently, this, the first item, I just went through and cleaned up some of the language, and this again was taken from state code, to clarify some things within our ordinance as a direction for staff to go when they're assessing nonconformities and structures. It gets a little confusing when you have a nonconformity. Basically, when somebody removes a structure, you've lost that ability to put it back in the same footprint. So this clarifies a little bit of direction in that respect. There was two basic components of this amendment. One of which was the ability to replace a structure in the event of a casualty loss. And that would be an act of God, a fire, tornadoes. If the board, I don't know that this is all new board. Mr. Jesse will remember this from the tornado. If you remember back in 2011, the board actually took action to allow the homeowners to replace their homes in the same footprint, because a lot of these structures were non-conforming. This section allows staff the next hour or day to allow people replacement. The board does not have to take action to enable staff to give back structures in the same footprint. They can build back. This is in state code. Pretty much act of God includes a lot of things: fires, tornadoes, floods, anything of that nature. The only thing it doesn't, obviously you can't burn your house down, and that's arson, that's excluded. So that's that one component. I think that's a good thing. It's good for our citizens, and it makes it easier to process these type things. The floodplain ordinance does come into play. If you're in a floodplain and you had a slab foundation and you lose the whole structure, you'll get the same footprint. You may be only 2 inches off a property line, but you will have to lift it to flood standards. So floodplain ordinance does kick in there. So there's not much else with that. You see all the language. Here I scratched, just struck through the part that'll be removed, cleaned up the language a little bit, and this is pretty much a whole new section. The other part of this, the other component is a replacement of a manufactured home. We actually had special exception requirements for replacement of a manufactured home in districts that usually wouldn't permit them, such as Village Community or residential, or any district that wouldn't That was the only ones we had special exception. In fact, with this ordinance, those requirements will be removed. State code enables a homeowner or a single, if you have a manufactured home, you may replace it with either a single or a double manufactured home. State codes, if it's out of a manufactured home park. If you have a non-conforming manufactured home park, it dictates you can replace a single with a single. So we've known about this for a while, and this is being kind of a complicated thing. It's taken us a while to fix it. We've actually been following state code for some time now. We've allowed replacements of manufactured homes per the state requirements. So if somebody comes in, they need to replace it. In most cases, you have a manufactured home that's failing or maybe non-inhabitable, and somebody's upgrading to a newer structure, which is a good thing for the homeowner. So those are the two basic components of this ordinance amendment. I'm not going to read verbatim through here. The other components, of course, will be the removal of those special exception requirements in the districts that now require them. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer any questions anybody has, but I'll turn it over to public hearing.
Thank you, Dave. I will open the public hearing. Anyone like to speak? I'll close the public hearing. Comments from the board? Questions for Dave?
No one have any questions, I'll just make a motion to approve the ordinance amendment of 2020-1 on the special, for this ordinance.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jesse, second by Mr. Williams. Any further discussion?
Mr. Jesse?
Aye.
Yes.
Mr. Coons?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Kimbrough?
Yes.
I like that. We need a video.
Don't mess up around here, Wayne.
Motion carries.
And last but not least will be basically adoption of the revised floodplain ordinance. Matt, I think if you go to the slide and click it, David Self did most of this work, so he's more familiar with it than I am. They've added a few definitions. It did come up. I think David picked up on one. We may have to, this is typical federal government. The floodplain, it says it would be effective May 17th. What will happen is if the board should approve this, it goes back to FEMA and they look it over one last time. And, once that happens, it all goes, it's effective that date that's effective there. I think David picked up there's an effective date in here that needs to be corrected. We may note that. That it may, if you so decide to approve it, make a condition that nuances and any updates and dates would be included in this. But I think for the most part, they've added a couple definitions. Base flood elevation, it was referred to as 100-year frequency. Now base flood is the catch term. It's synonymous with a 100-year floodplain, but base flood is what they refer to when they give the elevations for the flooding.
Is that because they were having 100-year floods every 10 years?
Yeah, right. They don't want to call it that. People get upset when they occur over, more frequent than 100 years. And that's not what it really, it's equated to 100 years. It's actually a statistic is basically what it is. So anyway, there wasn't a lot in the body of the text. Most of the amendments were, you can see that'll have to be amended to the new date. Actually, it's going to be in May. So I think, yeah. He's got it there. So any other place it may not be there. There again, base flood. You can see it's Pretty much the same. There's nothing,
Was the preponderance just wording changes, nothing of
pretty,
substance?
pretty much. They've added some definitions when you get to the end, so. Let me see. They've added some language on manufactured homes. Added that in there. And I think the more substantive changes were in the definitions. They added several definitions in the end.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, doesn't look like it looks like it's pretty clean up to this point, so. And this is in conjunction, I'll note that the maps were revised as well. Those maps went through, actually FEMA conducted the public comment period on those maps. So we didn't have to worry about that. So that comment period has passed. There were no comments of note. I think they received one comment. I think it was more of a question, but.
So all the language in the ordinance that doesn't have a strike through is in our existing ordinance?
Correct.
Changes are struck through and underlined.
Yeah, there we have base flood again, so that went through all the base flood, base flood. These are the new additions. I believe this was a new definition. As the notations to the side. There again, I'm not as familiar with it as David was. He worked with DCR on this. They was back and forth, comment, back and forth, back and forth. So you can see base flood elevation's been redefined, and they've added a few definitions in.
The language changes that sorry, thank you. The language changes we've incorporated in here, are they required by FEMA?
Correct.
So we really don't have a whole lot of choice here, do we?
Correct.
So we need to state that up front for the record, that we don't have a whole lot of choice here, right?
Correct. If we want our flood insurance to stay in good graces with the
I
feds.
think most of our waterfront property owners want their flood.
Yeah,
insurance, is that correct?
it's quite important that we keep this up to date because we do not want to, they're very, I don't know how they would address the deficiencies, but they're quite forthcoming with the fact that they'll yank our program if we're not working with them correctly, so.
I guess I'll just parrot something that gets said every time we go to update this. If we have no choice in the language, why do they make it a local ordinance? Why don't they just make it a federal standard and say you will do this instead of you will adopt this?
I guess it has something to do, well, I don't know. I can't answer that question.
I think it's one of those questions that no one can answer.
Yeah, correct. I'm not going to attempt it. So you can see there's another addition. Of course, all the numbers get shifted with it, so. This will go back to DCR through the feds, and they'll give another, I guess it gets one last review to make sure we made the corrections correctly. And at that point, it'll be adopted and final. Just in case any of our board members were wondering, David Self went through the flood maps. Actually, there was probably less restriction. We have these limits of moderate wave action lines, Limwar lines that that are the limits of what you would, of the big waves, so to speak. And they actually they had those limits up in some creeks, and they actually pulled some of those limits back out towards the mouth of some of the creeks. So any owners, a lot of times our citizens get a little antsy when they start upping, making things more restrictive. I don't think that necessarily happened with these updated maps. They seem to be they keep the science and how they develop them tends to get better all the time. Originally they were taking off old quad sheets which only had 10-foot contours. Now they have LiDAR imaging, which is within a foot or two. So they were able to project those base flood elevations and come up with much better mapping. So, all this is getting, the technology is helping to assess where people's, where the danger is and where it's not. So Matt, with that, I'm just going to leave it for action. Like I said, we don't have any choice with this. We pretty much, my recommendation is to approve it.
Thank you, Dave.
This would be a public hearing.
I will open the floor for public comment. Any comments? I'll close the public comment period. Discussion among the board members.
Right, basically, to keep the homeowners in compliance with the flood insurance from FEMA. But if anybody else got any questions, if not, I'd like to adopt the revised version for the floodplain ordinance.
Second?
Motion by Mr. Jesse, second by Mr. Harris. Roll call.
Mr. Coontz?
Yes?
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Jesse?
Yes.
Mr. Kimbrough?
Yes.
It's been a long day.
All right, there being no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
sorry, you have one more public comment
I
period.
do?
Yes, sir, you do. Number 12 on your agenda.
oh. And I've gotten so
Stampede.
good at it, too.
The last one.
I'm going to open the floor for public comment.
I have
I
not,
got an hour to speak on something.
I have not received any public comment
I'm
cards.
going to close the public comment period.
I found my cricket charm.
Now you're,
No one's here.
now you're appropriate to it.
Now I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Mr. Jesse,
Second?
second by Mr. Harris. Roll call.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Jesse?
Yes.
Mr. Coontz?
Yes.
Mr. Kimbrough?
Yes.